It's very important to have minority women vote in the biggest numbers possible because there's so many issues that are specific to minority women. Women have to stand up and be counted and have to really take on environmental issues, the economy. We've got to have a healthcare system that will speak to the disparities in healthcare.
In terms of who's bearing the brunt of bad policy and kind of the ripple effects of bad policy, there's like a higher, like a disproportionate effect on women and on children.
It would seem to me that this is the greatest time in the world for women to really decide that they're going to get out there and do something about changing the world that we're in. It's possible to change the world.
When I first turned 18, I did vote. And the reason why was because of the cultural background and the civil rights movement and all of that. So I was very much involved in voting. When 2004 came along, I didn't feel that it was necessary to vote. I felt like, again, whoever they wanted to win was going to win, ultimately.
I know the last Bush fiasco in Florida where votes, were unfairly counted. African Americans came together in force to defeat Bush in that election. After garnishing all of their energy and pushing to come out with this outcome and getting out to vote, it still didn't matter. So it's that kind of apathy.
In the days that I was trying to get people to vote, even though men, for example, had the right to vote, African-American men had the right to vote from the Constitution in the 14th and 15th Amendments, they got that right. It became very clear that they were not actually going to be able to vote because there was a whole lot of stuff going on that made it impossible. There were all kinds of things that you could not do. So in the southern states, for example, they had such things as poll taxes. They also had literacy laws that said that you had to be able to interpret a sentence. So how did that suppress a vote? Well, if it was somebody who was white, you asked them a question like, tell me about Dick and Jane. Have you ever read that book? And if they could tell you about Dick and Jane, which was this children's story as you grew up, you could get to vote. But if you were somebody black in some of those states, they would ask you to interpret a section of the Constitution.
The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of the citizens in the several states.
And if you failed to interpret it to their satisfaction, you couldn't get to vote. So there were all kinds of suppression, but the worst of the suppressions was lynching. There were people who were African American who were lynched because they tried to vote. And this became such an incredible problem in the States that this is what really led to the foundation of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And a woman got involved in that. It was Ida Wells Barnett, who as a newspaper reporter, reporting those lynchings, got people to come together and decide that they needed to change this policy of suppression of people's right to vote, even though technically they had the right to vote. So I got first involved in the civil rights movement generally, got very much involved in workers' rights at the same time because there was so much unemployment, and it was very clear again there was segregation based on that. So there were things that were happening where people understood that the only way you could make major change in the United States was to have the power to use your vote in a way to elect people who would do the things that were necessary to really bring equality.
Voter intimidation has been there from day one. I remember once in San Diego during the 1960 campaign when President Kennedy was running for office. I had gone to the San Diego Union, to the newspaper, and I asked the newspaper there to cover my voter registration drive. And of course, they wouldn't give us any coverage. But on the day of the election, I got a call from one of our areas where we had been registering, and they said there's some men here in suits that are questioning the people's eligibility to vote. So I run down there, and here was the head of the San Diego Union newspaper challenging people to vote. So in the areas where we were at, we were able to keep them away. But this is very common, and in fact, they've done it, I think, at every election. This was back in 1960. Here we are in 2008, and they're still using the same tactics to keep people from voting.
Women don't believe that much in politicians. I think women have had it, especially the women who have found the politician who says one thing when the voting is coming up and then suddenly turns around and does something else.
One of the things that, and this goes across a gender divide, I have a big personal problem with how, come election time, black folks, and I think the same thing happens in every community of color, are mobilized effectively to go get the black votes. And so it's less about, what does your community really need? Or speaking to a black mother, what do you really need? Tell me your top 3 issues. And then call that from, talking to a bunch of folks, and let's put that on the table. That doesn't really happen. It's usually, let's make sure you're registered, get out and vote, and aren't the Republicans bad?
With this election and the African American and female running, it adds a little flavor to the election, but it really doesn't change the essence of what it is. It's still a political machine. They're still not really speaking to the issues that really matter to me. It's more immediate issues. I need to buy food for my kids today. My daughter's sick with an earache and I can't take her to the hospital. Or I really want to go get a job, but this child care situation is so crazy that I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. So unless you're talking about that, why should I listen to you? Because right now I got to go wash clothes and make dinner and my baby's sick. So we really have to get it down to a level where we're affecting or at least speaking to the issues that make a difference.